know that where you live affects how well you can read as an adult? Believe it or not, some states in the United States have half of their population that has a hard time reading as adults. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. So this is a map. I talked in the last video about PIAAC, which is a test given to adults in the United States and also globally. So NCES, which is part of the Department of Education, does a lot of data about education and education measurements. And that's something I don't think a lot of people realize when we talk about the Department of Education, especially what's going on politically. They do a lot of work about to show what's going on with education community, and it has a lot of researchers working on things. This is the map of the 2023 test. They call it a skills map, state and county indicators of adult literacy and numeracy. So basically what this is it shows how every single county in the United States is doing based on this test in adult literacy and numbers. And I'm just going to look at literacy here because that's my specialty. But if you wanted to, you could go over here to numeracy. And numeracy is math, and you can see what's going on with that. And I'm just going to look at overall, but I'm going to put the link in the description box. And if you're interested, you can dig into this yourself because it actually goes into all the education groups, the age groups, and also you can do it by state. So let's look at state first because this gives you more of an idea. So the darker the color on the map, the higher the score. So this really isn't a surprise for people who have looked at reading and reading policy in the United States, that the darkest ones are largely in the Northeast here, and there's a little bit on the West Coast as well. Washington and Oregon usually score pretty well in the Midwest, and then the South is struggling. That's pretty typical when you look at these maps. So you have to remember also that these are adults. For example, Tennessee has really increased their reading rates in recent years. Kentucky also has as well. But for right now, this is what adults are doing in these states. So the average is 264. You see Maine's doing really well, 273. Vermont, 277. New Hampshire, 279. New York is actually below. I think that's because there's a lot of rural poverty there. And I'm going to talk about poverty in just a minute. West Virginia is 260. Texas is 254, which kind of surprises me. But there is a lot of poverty in Texas, and there's also a large immigrant population that unfortunately sometimes has not had the chance to have much of an education. And New Mexico as well. Now, Nevada is 255. So some places in the West are actually doing worse than the South as far as adult education. Again, I think probably in 10 or 20 years, this might look a little different because of what's going on. Florida is low, and Alaska's doing great. It's very high. Again, you have a lot of higher educated adults in Alaska who are working in the oil fields and so forth. And the same in Hawaii. You have a lot of people who are quite wealthy who retire there and so forth. So Hawaii's doing well. That's the state. Now, what was really interesting to me is the county lookup, because we think that everything is based on the state, basically where you live. If you live in one of these so-called backward states or states where education is not very good, that is the whole state. But if you look at this, it's really not true at all, because in every single state, there are places where reading is much better and places where it's worse. So I'm just going to take South Carolina for an example. I used to work in Berkeley County, so let's look at that. So Berkeley County adults are actually a little bit higher than the state average and a little bit higher than the national average. But Berkeley County has a lot of industry. It's got a lot of wealthy retirees who have moved down there because of the weather. Similar pattern in Charleston County. Colleton County is a neighboring county pretty close to where I'm living now, and it's 248. Whereas we go to Dorchester County, which is adjoining and is actually the county I'm in now, it's higher than the average. It's 260. But again, just one county over, it's 248. So this shows you the great inequity that is going on. So we can actually look at this and see what's going on. So we can see that literacy is below and numeracy is below. That's not a surprise. And then if we go to Dorchester, it's actually about the same. We could go to Berkeley, it's about the same as the average. But then Charleston's much higher. Charleston has a lot of wealth in that community. And if we go to Georgetown, it's about the same. So Clarington is a very poor area, and it is below. So even within a kind of close to, even within two places that are pretty close to each other, sometimes even adjoining, there are big differences. Now, why is that? So what's interesting is I have a map here of poverty. So this explains the amount of poor people, the amount of people who are living in poverty, which actually in the United States is a pretty low threshold. Most people who live below that threshold are very, very poor. There are a lot of people who are really struggling who technically aren't living in poverty according to the definition. So if I go, let's go to Colleton County, which is what I was looking at. 21.8% of the people are living in poverty, which again is a very low threshold. So a lot of people are struggling there. And this is relatively old data. It's just how it is. Now let's go to Dorchester County, which is my county. Only 12% are in poverty, and their reading level's much, much higher. So if I zoom out, let's look at the national map. This map is actually pretty similar to this map. If you look at South Carolina, the cities on the coast and Columbia, which is in the middle, and some places in the upstate, the northern part of South Carolina, they are relatively doing okay as far as poverty. But then you've got these other communities that are doing very poorly. And a lot of them are rural communities, and they're having a hard time. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about briefly, is that I feel like in this country, we think of poverty as an urban problem, and there is a lot of urban poverty. It happens, but there's a lot of rural poverty, and people don't think about that much. That many times our rural school systems and our rural school districts are really struggling. And part of that is poverty. And a part of that is resources also, because those communities don't have as much money for their schools. They often can't afford a lot of intervention or special programs. They may not pay their teachers well, so they may not have a very trained workforce, a very trained teaching force. So that's just a really quick overview about what's going on with this. I'm going to put this in the description box if you're interested in looking at it. You can also compare counties. So let's look at those two I was talking about. Colleton County. First, you gotta go through the state, and I'm going to go Colleton. Let's look at Dorchester County, which again is adjacent to Colleton County. And I have to choose a state. This is a little bit clunky. So see, I could compare the two. So the average scale score, again, is 248 in Colleton and 269 in Dorchester. Huge difference when it comes to literacy and also in math. So there's 248 is the scale score in Colleton, and 269 is the scale score in Dorchester County. And when we look at math, we see a similar pattern. It's actually a bigger gap, 227 in numeracy and 254 in numeracy in Dorchester County. So this is just really interesting, and it just really shows inequality in education across the United States. So I want to hear from you. What do you notice about this map? What do you notice in your community and your state when it comes to poverty? How could you and how could we as a country make things more equitable? And until next time, keep learning and have a wonderful day.